there are facts out there that a lot of people don't know about. And when I started looking into the history of archaeology and going beyond the textbooks into the original scientific literature, the original reports published by archaeologists and geologists and paleontologists in the professional scientific literature, I began to see something very interesting. I saw many reports of scientists discovering human bones, human artifacts, human footprints, millions and millions of years old.
Yeah.
And I had to ask myself, well, why is it that these things are there in the original scientific reports, but they're not in the textbooks? It seemed like there was a process of knowledge filtration going on, whereby the facts and discoveries that support the dominant theories pass through this filter, which means you'll see them in the textbooks, whereas facts and discoveries that radically contradict the dominant ideas are filtered out simply because they contradict the dominant theories. So that is how I became involved in this research. As I said, it has a lot to do with how I was brought up with my life history.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I kind of have a little bit of a similar background. I moved around a lot when I was younger from coast to coast. I had family from overseas, and so I too was... I could conceptualize different worldviews, and I came to the same earlier conclusions, and especially with Indian and Vedic mythology. I often wonder, whether or not mythology of the indigenous cultures of this world are indeed a mythology, or just an interpretation of that civilization at the time observing the events. And I've come across, the archaeological evidence of the footprints millions of years old as well, ancient forms of spark plugs and coal, all kinds of stuff that you go into in depth in your books that just blew my mind. And it is very easy to say that, they're not sharing this information with the world because it doesn't fit into the worldview, and it's easy to throw it aside, but it really is a huge deal to have to rewrite all of those textbooks and history books, and a lot of people get discredited, and there's a lot of money involved in that too. How can people, like you or me on the radio, how can we really make a difference to push this stuff home? And I don't understand, how can we change this worldview to encompass like a larger history?
Well, one thing we can do is what we're doing now, is just talking about this evidence, allowing people to hear about it. When I speak to graduate students of archaeology or anthropology in universities, one of the main things I just try to do is just get them to understand that they should be aware of the entire data set that's relevant to their field of study. They're often amazed to hear there's such a huge body of discoveries they've never even heard about, not even to be spoken of negatively.
Yeah.
So I think, if we're going to talk about these questions like human origins and a lot of other different questions, we should have all the facts available before we make conclusions about what the real story is. So I think that's one thing we need to do. Now, unfortunately, those who are supporters of the current theories have, in most countries, a government-enforced monopoly in the education system. So that means only the facts that go along with their theories are going to be presented to people in the official education system,
right?
Which has the effect of marginalizing or delegitimizing alternative ideas. They're characterized as anti-science or pseudoscience, or, if they're even discussed at all. So I think that one thing that needs to be done if these now alternative ideas are going to attain more legitimacy and currency in society in general, is the monopoly the supporters of the current theory now have in the education system has to be ended.
Yeah.
Actually, they what they're doing, it's kind of like imposing a kind of state science on people. In modern free societies, we've come to understand there should be separation of church and state. In other words, the government shouldn't impose one religion on all the people under its jurisdiction. We understand that's wrong. People should be free to express their own spiritual commitments or lack of spiritual commitment. Let them be atheists. Let them choose whatever religion they want. That's how we see things in a modern free society. However, what we've done is we've allowed the supporters of the current theories to get government to impose a kind of state science on everybody. It's very dictatorial. It's like what went on under communism or other types of dictatorial governments where one worldview is imposed by the state on everyone. There is diversity of opinion in the scientific world about this question of human origins. It's a fact that the majority of scientists today accept the Darwinian theory of evolution. That's a fact. Everyone knows it. But there are also scientists who are now in an extreme minority who are exploring alternatives to the Darwinian theory of evolution, human evolution in particular. There are various types of intelligent design and creationism and indigenous worldviews that are serving as alternatives to the current theories. But what's happened is these alternatives have been excluded from the education system by the majority of scientists enlisting government to give them a monopoly in the education system, so that we have in effect today government and a group of scientists imposing a kind of state science on people, which means that at the present moment, the only way to get these alternatives out there is through what we might call underground methods, alternative radio, alternative TV, the World Wide Web, and things like that, which is sometimes that's just what's necessary. But if these ideas are going to become more widely accepted, then I think we have to see some changes in education policy, which I think would be a good thing.
Yeah, big time. I just had a conversation with a friend recently about how flawed the education system is in general, and how it's created essentially to produce a human product, to create an immaterial product in the end means. So, that is definitely a problem. What do you say to all these people? I want to talk about all of the amazing evidence that you've uncovered, but first, before I do that, I want to make a couple points and ask a couple questions here. What do you say to people who try and deflate the theories, that the human civilization is much older than is stated, by stating that, what if some of this archaeological evidence hasn't been pushed to strata below the surface by natural means, like earthquakes and plate shifting and plate tectonics and that sort of thing? What's your answer to that?
Well, if somebody can actually demonstrate that's actually happened, then I think that's a valid way to proceed. What I don't think is fair is just to raise a possibility about how evidence could be wrong, and if there's a possibility that it could be wrong, then to insist it must be wrong.
Right.
I think that's not a very scientific or logical or fair way to proceed. Anything is possible. I remember once I was giving a lecture in Denmark, in Copenhagen, about my book, Forbidden Archaeology, and an archaeologist from one of the universities there, was at the lecture, and he began raising, after I, presented a talk giving, evidence of extreme human antiquity in the form of human bones, human artifacts, human footprints, millions and millions of years old. He took that same approach, just to say, well, isn't it possible that, that artifact could have slipped through some crevice in the earth down into that ancient layer? Isn't it possible there could have been some movement whereby a modern human skeleton wound up in some very ancient layer of rock?
Yeah.
And my answer to him was, well, anything is possible. For example, I said it's possible that you're a 3D hologram, that's been programmed to say that. That's certainly possible. So what I told him, and what I think I would tell anybody who said that, okay, if you want to suggest that this artifact came from some higher level through some crack in the earth, then I think what you have to do is show, okay, here's a geological study of this exact place. Here we can see a fissure going from the top of the earth down into this ancient layer of rock 4 million years old. And here on the surface, there are artifacts like the ones that were found in the ancient layer, and we can see there are some that are stuck in the fissure that are exactly the same, and therefore, if that could be shown, well, I would agree with it. But to me, it's not enough just to say it's possible, there was some fissure. In that way, you could just dismiss any evidence, even including the evidence that supports the current theories, because you could always suggest some possible way in which the evidence could be wrong. So it's not a very scientific way to proceed. It's sort of like, say, if a parent bought a Christmas present for a child, and hid it in a closet or something. They didn't want the child to see the present, and they might tell the child, "Don't open the door because there's a ghost in there, a monster in there that'll come out and get you," or something like that. Well, I mean, you can proceed in that way. Of course, if I were the kid, maybe I'd just open the door and see if there really was a ghost or a monster in there. But, it's sort of the same sort of thing. It's like, scientists sort of taking the role of parents, and they regard, everybody else as like children who they can order around and try to scare with all kinds of possibilities and stories and things like that. So I don't think it's a very good way in which to proceed, and I don't think it's a valid objection to the evidence that I've raised.
Yeah, agreed, definitely. I know a lot of people at this point are probably thinking, well, what is the evidence that you found? What is all this amazing archaeological evidence that pushes the boundaries of intellectual thought and paradigm in regards to archaeology and human origins? But I want to just interject here quickly because I'm reading a book by a guy named Mac Tonnies. It's called The Cryptoterrestrials. And I don't know if you're familiar with that book.
I've heard of the name Mac Tonnies. I haven't read the book.
Yeah, it's kind of like a punk rock kind of rebellious approach to the whole extraterrestrial phenomenon, stating that, it's very possible that this whole UFO thing isn't a matter of extraterrestrial origins or transdimensional origins at all, but maybe something simpler, like some ancient civilization that's been kind of coexisting with us. The reason I bring up Mac Tonnies in his book is I'm wondering, are you convinced that it is the human species that has gone back millions of years into the archaeological record, or do you think it's possible that, maybe indeed it was either another group like us or an ancient form of us that existed? And that's why, in fact, Darwin's theory of evolution could be true, in fact, if there's another race similar to us on the Earth at that point in history.
Well, you would have to show that, there's time for such a race to have evolved. If you've got evidence for a human presence, going back